What if a little girl, forgotten by the world, stumbled upon a millionaire bound and left for dead in the trunk of a car, and in that fog-soaked dawn, both their lives were rewritten forever? If stories of redemption, justice, and unexpected family touch your heart, please like and subscribe so you can stay with us until the very last chapter of this journey. The Sodo district of Seattle slept under a heavy blanket of fog. Freight cranes loomed like skeletal giants along Harbor Island, their arms stretching toward the gray sky. At that early hour, the streets were silent except for the low hum of a passing freight train and the distant gulls that circled above the Duwamish River. The junkyard, tucked between warehouses and a shuttered tire factory, felt like the last place on earth where hope could live. 7-year-old Lily Brooks had learned to walk carefully here. The gravel crunched under her thin sneakers, and every sound seemed louder than it should have been in the mist. She carried a rust-spotted tin pail, scavenging for scraps of metal she could sell. Her hair, tangled and damp, clung to her cheeks as she crouched beside a line of abandoned sedans. That was when she heard it. A muffled thumping, a desperate scrape. Then, 3 faint strikes, like knuckles beating against steel. Lily froze, her breath frosting in the cold. Her instinct told her to run, to melt back into the alleys where no one noticed a child. But curiosity, sharper than fear, pulled her closer. She crept toward the sound and stopped at the rear of a black sedan, its paint dulled by dust and rust. The trunk quivered faintly with each strike. Her small hands found the latch, but it was locked. She pressed her ear to the metal. A hoarse voice rasped from within, muffled and broken. "Help, please." Lily glanced around the junkyard. The fog was her only witness. She wedged an old crowbar under the latch, using her whole body weight until the trunk groaned open with a metallic snap. The lid lifted, and what she saw made her stomach clench. A man lay bound inside, wrists cut and red from zip ties, duct tape pulled harshly across his mouth. His suit, an expensive navy wool, was torn and filthy, his face pale with hypothermia. His chest rose shallowly, a reminder of how close he was to slipping away. Airway, breathing, circulation. Lily had heard those words once from a volunteer medic near the shelters under West Seattle Bridge. She tugged the tape from his mouth, wincing at the sound of skin tearing. The man gasped, sucking in foggy air like it was gold. His eyes, gray and unsteady, landed on her, then widened. On the right side of Lily's brow, half hidden beneath her hair, was a faint, crescent-shaped scar. The man's entire body jolted as if struck. "No, it can't be," he whispered hoarsely. "Emma?" Lily blinked, confused. "My name's Lily." His chest heaved, the syllables almost breaking him. "You look exactly like my daughter." For a moment, the junkyard vanished around him. 2 years ago, his little girl had vanished in a storm near the river, swept into darkness. Every night since, Carter Hayes, the founder and co-CEO of Hayes and Pierce Capital, had lived with that hollow ache. Now, here, a child stood over him with the same scar, the same green eyes. He tried to sit up, but his muscles trembled violently. Lily slid her pail aside, working the brittle plastic of the zip ties with the edge of the crowbar until they snapped. The man crumpled forward, shivering uncontrollably. "You're cold," Lily muttered, almost scolding. She had seen men in the camps shake like that. Early signs of hypothermia. "You gotta move. Can you stand?" With her help, ridiculous, almost laughable, a 7-year-old propping up a man twice her size, he staggered out of the trunk, collapsing against the car's fender. He tried to speak again, but his throat caught. Lily studied him, distrust flickering across her thin features. She knew men with expensive shoes did not belong in junkyards. And yet something about the way he stared at her, as if she were both salvation and ghost, made her stay. "Who did this?" she asked. His lips parted. The word partner nearly slipped out, but his chest convulsed in pain before he could finish. Then the sound came. A low growl of an engine rolling through the fog, tires crunching gravel, a vehicle close. Lily's eyes widened. Her instincts screamed now, not curiosity but survival. She grabbed her tin pail, backing away from the man. "I have to go," she whispered. "No, wait!" His voice cracked, but she was already retreating, small feet vanishing into the mist. Just before the fog swallowed her, she turned back. "Don't die," she said simply. "I'll come back." The echo of her promise lingered in the fog even as Carter Hayes sank to his knees, his mind reeling with the impossible. His daughter's scar, his daughter's eyes, on the face of a stranger who had saved him. And from somewhere in the distance, headlights cut through the mist. Whoever had left him for dead wasn't finished. The fluorescent hum of Harborview Medical Center's emergency department washed the trauma bay in a sterile glow. Warmed V fluids threaded into Carter Hayes' arm, while a nurse tucked heated blankets up to his collarbone. The rewarming protocol had quieted the violent shivering, but the aftershocks still rolled through him. Fine tremors, a woolly confusion, the heavy fatigue that trails hypothermia. A resident lifted his wrist, noting the angry welts from zip ties. "Documenting restraint marks," she said for the chart. The attending physician, a calm woman with tired eyes, checked the monitor and gave a small nod. "Core temp is rising. You're not out of the woods, Mr. Hayes, but you're trending the right way." He tried to sit. Pain flared down his ribs. "I need to talk." "You will," she replied, "but slowly. Think of today as airway, breathing, circulation, and then questions." A shadow filled the doorway. Detective Avery Kim stepped in, hair pulled back, badge clipped at her belt. She had the self-contained stillness of someone used to crisis rooms. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I'm Detective Kim with SPD. If you're able, I need a preliminary intake interview." The attending gave a measured nod. 15 minutes, and he stays flat. He's still post-hypothermic. Dizziness and delayed responses are expected. She looked at Carter. "If the room tilts, you tell us." "I've lived in tilted rooms lately," he muttered. "Let's talk." Avery set a small recorder on the tray table. "Date, time, location," she said crisply. Then, "Mr. Hayes, describe what you remember." Carter let the dark unfurl. The parking garage near Pioneer Square after a late meeting. The precise, practiced hands, gloved, silent, dragging him backward. The blows, plastic biting his wrists, the trunk sealed like a coffin. "They moved like they'd rehearsed it," he said. "Efficient, no wasted motion." "How long confined?" "Hours, long enough to count seconds and lose track of them." "And how did you escape?" A thin, stunned smile ghosted across his face. "A child opened the trunk. A girl, 7, maybe. She ripped the duct tape from my mouth. If she hadn't, my airway—" He stopped, the memory catching. She had a scar. Right eyebrow, a crescent. My daughter had the same scar. Avery's pen paused. "Given your condition, I have to ask, any chance this was hypothermia confusion? Trauma-induced dissociative recall can color perception." "I know what cold does to the mind," he said, voice rough but steady. She was real. "She called herself Lily." Avery wrote the name carefully, then continued. "Who benefits if you're out of the picture?" He closed his eyes and saw a boardroom view of Elliott Bay, a man's measured smile. "My partner, Nolan Pierce. He's been pressing a drag along, the clean sale of all equity to Pacific Meridian. I hold a minority veto stake. If I disappear before the vote—" "Motive," Avery said, not triumphantly, but as a stone set on a scale. We'll pursue it. But we'll need more than theory. A uniformed officer entered with an evidence bag. Inside, a dirt-streaked burner phone. Recovered near a chain-link fence in Sodo, close to the car, he reported. Logged at scene. Photographed in place. Avery nodded. Chain of custody is intact, she said for the recorder. We'll push digital forensics. Call logs, voicemail, tower pings. We also recovered Mr. Hayes's personal phone records from the carrier. His handset is missing, presumed stolen. We'll file a probable cause affidavit for kidnapping and request warrants tied to this device. She turned back to Carter. We documented zip tie marks and duct tape residue. That's consistent with restraint. It gives us probable cause, Mr. Hayes, not a conviction. We still need metadata and corroboration. He exhaled. Then start with the girl. She said she'd come back. If she does, she'll be walking into the same fog I crawled out of. Avery's eyes, usually cool, warmed a fraction. We'll circulate a limited advisory, no public blast yet. Unhoused minors get exploited by publicity. We'll check West Seattle Bridge encampments and service providers. Any other descriptors? The lullaby, he said, surprising himself. She hummed something later. I can't explain why that matters. It just does. The attending reappeared, motioning the detective aside. Time. Avery clicked off the recorder but stayed one beat longer. We'll keep a protective detail on your door, she said. If you think of anything, call me. She slid a card onto the blanket. And Mr. Hayes, sometimes children see what adults miss. Don't ignore what you saw. Just anchor it to evidence. He nodded. The room dipped and steadied. Hours later, warmed and wired with saline and broth, Carter dozed and woke to the gentle bureaucracies of survival, lab draws, vitals, forms. A social worker stopped by to discuss safety planning. An officer outside his door conferred in hushed tones with a nurse. The ordinary rituals of a hospital became a scaffold he could lean against. Near dusk, the attending returned with discharge paperwork. Here's the plan, she said. You're conditionally cleared for discharge under SPD supervision once your temp stays stable for 2 more readings. You'll go home or to a secure location with a protection detail. No solo travel, no exertion for 24-48 hours. Expect myalgia, fatigue, and wooziness. If you push it, you'll relapse. Carter absorbed the words and the warning. Understood. Follow up tomorrow at the clinic, she added, tapping the page. If you feel chest pain, confusion worsens, or the shivering comes back, you return here. Don't try to prove anything to anyone tonight. He managed a wry breath. Proving things is my worst habit. Break it, she said, and left him with a thermal jacket folded at the foot of the bed. Avery reappeared briefly with an update. Digital pulled a partial voicemail off the burner, she said. Muddied but enough to escalate. Again, probable cause, not proof. We await full metadata. He pictured the trunk's lid, the girl's small hands, the crescent scar. It will be enough, he said, mostly to himself. When the night nurse unhooked his IV and helped him sit, the world tilted again. Soreness gripped his ribs. His legs felt like borrowed things. He breathed through it, counting like he had in the dark. The officer offered an arm. Carter accepted, mostly. At the exit, cool air met his face. The city smelled of rain and bus brakes and something like salt. He pulled the thermal jacket tight. The instructions to rest sat in the discharge packet against his chest like a moral weight. Across the street, a delivery truck hissed to a stop, and for an instant, the sound was tires on gravel, a low engine in fog. He closed his eyes until the past faded back to memory. When he opened them, the present waited. A detective who believed in evidence, a doctor who believed in limits, a city that could still swallow a child. Home? The officer asked. For now, Carter said. He stepped forward, ignoring the soreness that warned him to slow down. Tomorrow, he promised himself, not the officer, the search would begin. The West Seattle Bridge loomed overhead like a concrete leviathan, its massive spine stretching across the Duwamish River. The morning traffic above carried the white noise of the city, but beneath the overpass, another Seattle existed. Tarps sagged between rusted shopping carts, burn barrels smoldered with damp wood, and tents stitched from mismatched canvas huddled together like survivors of a storm. The city called it an encampment. The people who lived here called it home. Carter Hayes picked his way across the gravel, every step sending a dull ache through his ribs. His doctor's warning still echoed. No exertion. No proving yourself tonight. Yet here he was, less than 24 hours after leaving Harborview, ignoring soreness that gnawed at his chest. The officer assigned to him waited at the edge of the encampment, uneasy about entering without backup. So Carter went alone, his hands gripping a brown paper bag filled with food. Protein bars, applesauce, bottled water. Breadcrumbs he hoped might draw the child he had seen in the fog. The girl. Lily. Emma? His mind refused to choose between the names. The encampment stirred at his presence. A man wrapped in a Seahawks blanket squinted at him with suspicion. A young woman bent over a broken stroller muttered, "Wrong neighborhood, suit." He couldn't blame them. No one in hand-tailored wool coats came here unless they were reporters, social workers, or cops, and none of those were trusted. Carter lowered his eyes and moved carefully until he reached a cluster of tents near the water. A voice rose from behind him strong despite its gravelly timbre. "Looking for someone, mister?" He turned. An older woman emerged from the shadows of a tarp-lined shelter. She leaned heavily on a wooden cane, her silver hair pulled back under a scarf. Her coat was patched and frayed, but her gaze was sharp, alive. "Yes," Carter said carefully. A child, 7, maybe 8. Brown hair, green eyes, a crescent scar above her right brow. Calls herself Lily. The woman studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing, testing. "And you are?" "Carter Hayes." He hesitated. For years that name had been currency in boardrooms, a ticket to respect or fear. Here it was only a confession. "She saved me." The woman's expression softened slightly, though her guard remained. "Name's Ruth Parker. People here call me Grandma Ruth. And yes, she's real." Relief surged through Carter, leaving him weaker than before. "You know her?" Ruth nodded, her voice lowering. 2 years ago, after one of those storms that swallow the riverbanks, I found her by the Duwamish. Soaked to the bone, shaking like a leaf. Couldn't remember a thing, not even her name. All she held on to was a scrap of a memory. She told me about a pink house. Carter's breath caught. He steadied himself against a post. "A pink house?" Ruth's eyes flicked to him. "That mean something to you?" He swallowed hard. Emma's room had been painted blush pink, daisies stenciled on the wall. His wife had chosen the shade. He had carried the paint cans himself. A house of pink, yes. His daughter's world. "It could mean a lot," he admitted, voice rough. "Please, tell me more." Ruth tapped her cane against the ground, as though grounding her words. "She had no papers, no ID. I should have called DSHS, filed a mandatory report, but I've seen what happens. Kids disappear into the system. Shelters split families. Foster placements turn into file numbers. I wasn't handing her over to that, so I took her in, gave her a cot, a warm meal, and the name Lily." Carter stared at her. The woman before him had nothing, yet she had carried the burden of raising a child she didn't owe. His throat tightened. Why are you really here, Mr. Hayes? Ruth asked, her eyes drilling into him. You want to rescue her? Adopt her? Or you want to use her to fill some hole in your chest? Carter flinched at the directness. I don't want to take her away. I need to know who she is. She might be... His voice cracked. She might be my daughter. Ruth's face shifted, the hard lines giving way to something more fragile. Your daughter? He nodded. 2 years ago, in a storm. She was lost near the river. No one ever found her. She had the same scar, the same eyes. Silence stretched. Only the drip of rainwater from the bridge punctuated it. Finally, Ruth sighed. If that's true, then God help us all. Because this girl has been through enough storms. If you're going to step into her life, it better be with steady hands. Carter nodded, humbled. I swear to you, I'll put her safety first. Always. A small voice cut through the damp air. Grandma? They both turned. From behind a tent, Lily appeared, clutching a dented plastic bucket. Her green eyes widened when they fell on Carter. For a heartbeat, fear flared, then recognition. You came back, she whispered. Carter's heart lurched. I told you I would. She clutched the bucket to her chest like a shield. You shouldn't be here. Bad people are looking for you. He took a careful step closer, ignoring the protest from his ribs. I know, but I had to see you. His voice trembled. You look so much like someone I lost. Lily tilted her head, confusion knitting her brow. Before she could speak, Ruth laid a protective hand on her shoulder. Inside, child. We'll talk later. But Lily didn't move. She set her bucket down and crouched by the burn barrel, humming softly. A melody, halting and familiar. Carter's breath stopped. He knew that tune. A lullaby he had composed years ago, rocking Emma to sleep in a pink-painted room. His knees nearly buckled. Where did you learn that? He asked, his voice no louder than the flame's crackle. Lily shrugged. I don't know. It just feels safe. Ruth's gaze hardened, but Carter saw the truth behind it. Fear of what memory might unleash. He forced himself to nod gently. Then keep it. It's yours. They sat by the barrel as the flames licked upward, 3 unlikely companions, one bound by blood, one by choice, and one by something still unnamed. At last, Ruth rose, gripping her cane. That's enough for today. Mr. Hayes, you need rest, and she needs peace. If you want to come back, do it with respect. I will, Carter promised, rising stiffly. Pain radiated through his ribs, but he barely noticed. Thank you, Ruth. She studied him one last time, then nodded curtly. We'll see. As Carter walked back toward the edge of the encampment, Lily's voice followed him, soft but insistent. You won't die, right? He turned, meeting her eyes across the distance. Not if I can help it. She nodded, satisfied, then vanished into the shadows of the tents. Carter stepped into the drizzle, his heart both broken and mended in the same breath. The city roared above, indifferent, but beneath the bridge, hope had sparked, fragile as a flame in a barrel, yet alive. Capitol Hill rose above Seattle like a patchwork of murals and espresso steam, its streets damp from the drizzle that never seemed to end. Rainbow flags hung in store windows, and coffee shops spilled warmth onto the sidewalks. For Carter Hayes, walking there with Ruth Parker and Lily at his side felt like crossing an invisible border, from the shadows under a bridge to a neighborhood where permanence seemed possible. They stopped before a modest, brick-faced building tucked between a cafe and a laundromat. 2 stories, a narrow entryway, the faint smell of fresh paint wafting from the hall. To most Seattleites, it was just another rental complex. To Ruth and Lily, it could be the difference between shelter and the cold. "This is temporary," Ruth muttered, leaning on her cane. Her sharp gaze darted from the weathered awning to the security buzzer at the door. "I don't want her to think this is some fairy tale that disappears in a week." "It's not charity," Carter replied softly. "It's housing first. Stability comes before everything else. Schooling, health care, memory. Without a roof, none of that stands a chance." Ruth's eyes narrowed. "You talk like a case manager." "I've spent 2 years reading about the system I once ignored," he said. "I'm still learning." The leasing agent arrived, jingling a set of keys. He had been briefed to treat Ruth as the applicant of record. Carter had insisted. Dignity mattered. Ruth's name on the short-term lease, her signature on the tenant-landlord addendum. Carter's only role was guarantor, the quiet financial shadow that made it possible. In the small office, Ruth grumbled at the stack of forms: background check waivers, income verification, credit references. "I've got none of this." "That's why I signed the guarantor line," Carter reminded her. "You're the tenant. You have control. I'm just the backstop." Ruth's pen scratched across the pages with reluctant force. Finally, she accepted the keys. The apartment was on the 2nd floor, a walk-up with narrow stairs. The hardwood floors bore scratches from decades of tenants. The kitchen was a galley with outdated appliances, but the windows overlooked a maple tree just beginning to bud. For Lily, it was a palace. She dropped her battered bucket at the threshold and sprinted from room to room, her sneakers squeaking against the wood. She opened every closet, tested every doorknob, and finally collapsed onto the living room floor, giggling. "Grandma," she shouted, "we have walls and doors that lock." Ruth tried to hide the tremor in her hands as she leaned on the counter. "Don't get used to it too fast," she warned. "Sometimes the rug gets pulled out." Carter crouched beside her. "Not this time. Rent, utilities, security deposit, they're handled. Quietly. You won't owe me anything." She shot him a look. "Money can't buy trust." He nodded. "I'm not asking for trust. I'm asking for the chance to keep her safe." While Ruth set down her few belongings, Lily pulled out a handful of crayons Carter had bought at a drugstore. She sprawled on the floor, tongue sticking out in concentration as she sketched. Minutes later, she held up her drawing proudly. It was a crude pink square with a triangle roof and stick-figure windows. Beside it stood a little girl and an older woman with a cane. Above the house, she had scribbled a sun with rays shooting outward in uneven lines. "It's our house," Lily explained, "but it should be pink. I think it was pink before." Carter's throat tightened, but he said nothing. The image echoed the memory Ruth had mentioned, the pink house, Emma's old room transposed into crayon strokes. He forced himself to smile. "It's beautiful, Lily. You made it real." She beamed, then taped it crookedly to the wall with a strip of Scotch tape she'd scavenged from the leasing office desk. By afternoon, they faced the next step: school enrollment. Ruth grumbled as she reviewed the forms. "They'll ask for immunization records, proof of residence, everything we don't have." "Seattle Public Schools has a McKinney-Vento liaison," Carter explained. "Federal law requires immediate enrollment of homeless students without standard documentation. The school will accept the lease as proof of residence, and the clinic will update her immunization record." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "You've been studying." "I had to. I thought I lost my daughter to a system I didn't understand. I won't make the same mistake twice." That afternoon, he accompanied Ruth and Lily to Lowell Elementary, a public school just a few blocks away. The principal greeted them kindly but skeptically, accustomed to families with incomplete paperwork. Carter let Ruth do the talking, staying a step behind. The McKinney-Vento liaison stepped in, assuring them that Lily would be placed in a class immediately. When the forms were signed, Lily bounced on her toes. "Do I get to read books? Like real books?" "Yes," the principal said with a smile. "And you'll have classmates, too." Her eyes widened as though the idea itself was treasure. Back at the apartment, Ruth stirred a pot of soup on the stovetop. The smell of onions and carrots filled the air, weaving a sense of home into the bare walls. Lily sat cross-legged, flipping through a donated picture book, humming faintly as she traced the drawings. Carter lingered by the window, looking down at the street. The drizzle blurred the neon signs of the cafe below. For the first time in years, he felt something almost foreign. Stillness. But beneath it lay unease. Nolan Pierce's face flashed in his mind, smooth as glass, relentless as debt. He knew his partner would not sit idle. The drag-along rights loomed. The board would press again. Behind him, Ruth's voice cut through his thoughts. "If you're going to be around, Mr. Hayes, you'd better learn one thing." He turned. "What's that?" "This girl doesn't need another man who makes promises he can't keep. She needs consistency. Show up or don't. But don't hover like a ghost." Carter nodded slowly. "I understand. I'll show up." That night, as he prepared to leave, Lily darted to the door with another crayon drawing. This time it showed 3 figures, a girl, a grandmother, and a tall man in a suit. Above them, she'd drawn a lopsided sun. "Can you keep this safe?" she asked, pressing it into his hand. His voice caught. "Yes, always." As he stepped into the damp night, the paper trembling in his grasp, Carter realized something startling. For 2 years, grief had turned him into a man defined by loss. Now, in a small Capitol Hill apartment with soup simmering and a child drawing pink houses, he had been given a chance to become something else. A father again. The Queen Anne neighborhood rose like a crown above Seattle, its steep streets winding past 100-year-old houses with turrets and porches. From the balcony of Carter Hayes's mansion, Elliott Bay spread wide, ferries slicing the water into silver ribbons. To the world outside, the house was a monument of wealth and survival. To Carter, it had been a mausoleum for 2 years. That evening, he unlocked the heavy front door, heart hammering. He hadn't invited anyone inside since Emma vanished. Now Ruth Parker stepped cautiously across the threshold, cane tapping against marble tile. Lily darted past her, wide-eyed at the chandeliers and vaulted ceilings. "This place could fit half the encampment," Ruth muttered, her voice edged with disbelief. Carter offered no defense. He only said, "There's one room I want you both to see." They ascended the grand staircase. Every step tightened the band around his ribs, not from injury, but from memory. At the end of the hall, a door waited. The knob was brass, cold to the touch. His hand hovered, trembling. "You don't have to," Ruth said, sensing his hesitation. "Yes," Carter whispered. "I do." He turned the knob. The hinges groaned, releasing a faint breath of lavender. The pink room lay preserved exactly as it had been the night Emma disappeared. The walls glowed with soft blush paint, daisies stenciled in cheerful rows. A white bed with a daisy quilt stood against the wall, the sheets tucked with hospital precision as if waiting for a child who had only stepped away. On the dresser sat a carousel music box, mid-spin but frozen. Dust had gathered in quiet corners, yet nothing had been touched. Lily stepped across the threshold slowly, as though entering sacred ground. She reached the bed, her hand grazing the quilt. Then her eyes fell on a stuffed bear perched neatly against the pillow. Brown fur worn thin, one ear frayed, a bright blue ribbon tied snugly around its neck. "Captain Blue," she whispered. hugging the bear to her chest instinctively. Carter's knees nearly gave way. He gripped the doorframe for balance. "Emma named him that when she was 2, he breathed. She wouldn't sleep without him." Ruth's lips pressed together, her eyes glistening despite herself. The room seemed to awaken around them. Lily buried her face in the bear's fur, inhaling deeply. She touched the quilt again, then ran her fingers along the edge of the windowsill. "This smells like rain," she murmured. Carter's chest constricted. Emma had said the same words years ago, after a summer storm when the quilt had dried on the porch. The sensory flood rushed in, lavender sachets in the dresser drawers, the faint creak of the rocking chair in the corner, the patter of rain against the bay window. Memories Carter had entombed broke open. And then Lily began to hum, softly, unconsciously, the lullaby. The melody Carter had composed late nights at this very piano when Emma was small enough to fit in the crook of his arm. Ruth gripped her cane tighter, whispering, "Mercy." Carter's hands trembled as he crossed the room. He sank to his knees beside the bed, voice breaking. "Emma?" At the sound, Lily froze. Her lips parted, the name pressing against her tongue. She stammered. But before the word could take shape, pain rippled across her face. She dropped Captain Blue, clutching her head with both hands. "It hurts!" she gasped. "It hurts so bad!" Carter panicked, reaching for her. "She's seizing—" "No," Ruth snapped, kneeling awkwardly with her cane. "Not a seizure, a migraine, trauma trigger. I've seen it before when she tries to remember." Lily rocked back and forth, sobbing. Carter gathered her into his arms, helpless. "Breathe, sweetheart. Just breathe." Her body trembled, small fists gripping his shirt. The minutes stretched like hours. Finally, the storm subsided. She sagged against him, exhausted, damp hair sticking to her forehead. Ruth's eyes brimmed with tears as she stroked the child's back. "You can't force it, Hayes. Memory doesn't work on command. If you push too hard, you'll break her." "I didn't," Carter whispered hoarsely. "The room did." "Then the room stays closed," Ruth said firmly. Carter swallowed hard. He wanted to argue, to shout that the truth was within reach. But looking at Lily, her face pale, her breath shallow, he knew Ruth was right. He carried her gently from the room, her small hands still clutching his shirt. Ruth followed, her cane striking the floor with the sound of judgment. Carter cast one last glance over his shoulder. The pink room glowed faintly in the dim light, a shrine no longer silent, but dangerous. Downstairs, Carter laid Lily on the sofa. Ruth covered her with a quilt from her bag, patched, worn, but warm. The contrast was stark, the perfection of Emma's untouched room upstairs and the makeshift survival blanket that had truly kept her alive. For a long time, none of them spoke. The only sound was Lily's uneven breathing. At last, Ruth broke the silence. "I don't doubt what you feel. Maybe she is Emma. Maybe she isn't. But this child's safety comes before your grief. Always." Carter bowed his head. "You're right." Ruth's gaze softened. "If you can remember that, maybe you're not just another man chasing ghosts." Carter sat back, rubbing his eyes. He thought of all the boardrooms where he had wielded certainty like a weapon. Here, certainty was poison. On the sofa, Lily stirred in her sleep. Her hand reached out blindly until it found Captain Blue again, pulling him close. A faint hum escaped her lips. The lullaby, broken but present. Carter's throat closed. For the first time since the storm 2 years ago, hope did not feel like betrayal of grief. It felt like a spark of resurrection. But he also knew this: memory could heal, or it could wound, and the path forward would require patience he had never practiced. As twilight settled over Queen Anne, Carter looked out across Elliott Bay. The ferries traced their lines across the water, indifferent to human storms. Above them, the city lights blinked alive, and in the house behind him, a child's voice had almost spoken her name. Almost. The Columbia Center towered over downtown Seattle like a black shard piercing the gray sky. Its upper floors vanished into low clouds, but inside, the 76th floor boardroom gleamed with polished mahogany and glass walls that looked out on Elliott Bay. The space was designed to intimidate. It worked. Carter Hayes entered slowly, his body still aching from bruised ribs and lingering fatigue. He had ignored the doctor's instructions, choosing to climb into the lion's den instead of lying low. He knew the risks. Nolan Pierce wouldn't wait. Pacific Meridian Holdings was circling, and if Carter remained silent, the sale would proceed. Around the long table sat directors in bespoke suits, their portfolios stacked like shields in front of them. At the head of the table, Nolan Pierce leaned back in his chair, immaculate as ever, silver cufflinks gleaming, smile perfectly measured. His voice was smooth as silk when he greeted Carter. "Carter," Nolan said, tone dripping with concern. "You look better. Harborview must have treated you well. I hope you've had time to rest." Carter dropped his folder onto the table. "I didn't come here to rest. I came to speak." Nolan's smile widened. "Then let's begin. As you all know, Pacific Meridian has presented a binding offer. The drag-along clause will ensure a clean exit for all shareholders. Our fiduciary duty is clear. Maximize return." One director cleared his throat. "The valuation is extraordinary. Liquidity at this scale is rare." Carter felt the weight of their stares. To them, this was a simple equation. Billions offered, billions pocketed. But for him, it was survival. He stood, ignoring the pull of pain in his side. "You want numbers? Fine. But numbers without integrity are smoke. I was abducted last week, bound, gagged, left for dead. Someone wanted me gone before this deal closed. That is not coincidence." The boardroom buzzed with unease. Nolan raised a placating hand. "My colleagues, you must forgive Carter. Trauma can distort perception. Dissociative recall, paranoia. It's natural after what he endured. But to suggest foul play at this table? Reckless." Carter's hands tightened on the folder. Reckless would be staying silent. He opened the folder and slid a USB drive toward the assistant managing the projection system. A moment later, static crackled through hidden speakers. Then came a voice, low, distorted, recorded from the burner phone recovered in Sodo. "Make sure Hayes disappears before the signing." The words hung in the room like a knife suspended midair. Gasps rippled through the directors. One leaned forward. "What is this?" Detective Avery Kim's voice followed on the recording, clinical and precise. This voicemail was extracted from the recovered device. Chain of custody intact. Digital forensics underway. Carter's gaze cut across the table. "That isn't paranoia. That's evidence." Nolan's smile faltered but did not vanish. "Evidence of what? Anyone could have purchased a burner phone. Anyone could have fabricated this audio. Until forensics complete metadata analysis, it's nothing more than probable cause. You all know the law. Probable cause is not conviction." The words hit the air like oil on water, meant to smother, to delay. And yet, he wasn't wrong. Carter knew it. He had deliberately invited Avery's disclaimer into the file for that reason. He wasn't presenting a verdict. He was presenting risk. One director muttered, "If federal investigators connect this to us, exposure is catastrophic." Another said, "We need to pause. The optics alone could sink us." Nolan spread his hands. Or we can move forward swiftly, close the deal, and avoid the quagmire of rumors. If we stall, we bleed. Carter slammed his palm against the table, startling even himself. If we rush, we sell this firm's soul. I invoke my minority veto. No acquisition proceeds until a forensic audit is complete. The room fell into stunned silence. The veto clause was obscure, buried in their original partnership agreement, but it was binding. Nolan's face hardened, his smile now brittle glass. That veto was never meant to be weaponized. You're clinging to ghosts, Carter. A girl in a junkyard, a scar, a lullaby. You're chasing memories while jeopardizing billions. This is not grief counseling. This is finance. Carter leaned forward, voice raw. Finance without conscience is rot. And yes, I am clinging to her. Because that girl saved me when your men tried to bury me in a trunk. She may be my daughter, Nolan. She may be Emma. And I'll burn every deal you make until I know the truth. The director shifted uneasily, glancing between the two men. Some looked sympathetic, others impatient, but all of them felt the seismic crack splitting the partnership. Nolan straightened his cufflinks, regaining composure. So be it. But remember this. The markets won't wait for your grief. You've made yourself a liability. And you've made yourself a suspect, Carter shot back. He gathered his folder. Pain shooting down his ribs as he stood. For a moment, the reflection in the window caught him, a man thinner, paler, shaken. Yet behind the pallor, there was fire. The board murmured, some calling for postponement, others for immediate legal counsel. Nolan tried to steer the chaos, but the room no longer belonged to him alone. Carter walked out, every step heavy but defiant. Behind him, the boardroom buzzed with uncertainty. Ahead of him, the skyline stretched across Elliott Bay. Indifferent to the wars of men. He knew this was only the beginning. The voicemail had bought him time, not victory. Forensic analysis could take weeks. Nolan's influence would not fade overnight. But he had shifted the balance. And in his chest, the image of Lily, Emma, burned steady. She had dragged him from death's trunk into life. Now he would drag truth into the light, no matter how many boardrooms he had to set ablaze. The chapel on First Hill was the kind of place people overlooked. Wedged between a pharmacy and a row of aging apartments, its steeple barely rose above the rooftops. The bell had cracked decades ago, but the building lived on, repurposed as a haven for community therapy programs. Its side rooms smelled faintly of cedar and candle wax, its wooden pews scuffed by generations of knees. That afternoon, Carter Hayes sat before an upright piano whose yellowed keys bore the marks of time. His hands hovered above them, uncertain. Across the small room, Ruth Parker settled into a chair, her cane leaning against the wall, her eyes sharp with suspicion. Lily, still Lily, though the question of Emma lingered like smoke, sat cross-legged on the rug, Captain Blue cradled in her lap. A licensed therapist, Dr. Marine, observed from a corner, her clipboard balanced on her knees. "We'll go slow," she said gently. "Music-evoked autobiographical memory is powerful, but it can overwhelm. Mr. Hayes, play only what feels safe." Carter nodded. His chest tightened as he pressed the first key. A soft note bloomed, fragile as glass. Then another. Slowly, a lullaby unfolded, the same melody he had written years ago, rocking Emma to sleep in the pink room. The notes were halting, uneven, but the tune carried. The sound filled the small chapel. Dust motes drifted in shafts of afternoon light, dancing to the rhythm. Lily's head lifted, her green eyes widened, fixed on the keys. Her small fingers tightened around the bear's ribbon. I know that song," she whispered. Carter's breath caught. Where from? Her brow furrowed as if she were listening inward. I don't know. But when you play it, I see things. What things? Ruth asked, her voice softer than usual. Rain, Lily said slowly. A playground slide. Black water. So loud. And someone shouting. Over and over. Emma! The word broke from her lips like a sob. Carter's fingers faltered on the keys, his eyes blurred with tears. That's your name, he whispered. Emma Hayes. Lily clutched her head. It hurts. It's all mixed up. Dr. Marin leaned forward calmly. Stay with the sound, Lily. Let the music hold you. Don't fight it. Carter's hands trembled, but he played the refrain again, softer this time, coaxing rather than commanding. The melody wrapped the room in a cocoon. Lily's breathing steadied. She lowered her hands and looked at him, clarity breaking through confusion. Her lips trembled. You're Daddy. The word struck Carter like a lightning bolt. His chest collapsed, his body sagging forward, but his hands kept moving across the keys, clinging to the song. Tears spilled freely, unchecked. Yes, he choked. Emma, I'm Daddy. I never stopped looking for you. The bear slipped from her lap as she scrambled to her feet and rushed to him. Carter turned on the bench, gathering her into his arms, her small frame shaking against his chest. For a long moment, the chapel filled with nothing but sobs and the faint resonance of the lullaby. Ruth turned her face away, tears streaming silently. Her cane tapped once against the wooden floor, a sound equal parts grief and surrender. Dr. Marin scribbled quickly, then spoke softly. Integration is happening. The music has bridged dissociated fragments, but we must move carefully. Too much recall at once can re-traumatize. Balance is critical. Carter nodded, clutching Emma, Lily, his daughter. Whatever name she chose. He pressed his forehead against her hair, inhaling the scent of lavender shampoo Ruth had bought at a dollar store. His voice was ragged. I thought I lost you. I thought the river took you. Emma's small voice wavered. I remember the water. It was dark. I was scared. Then nothing. Until Grandma. She pulled back, looking at Ruth with raw gratitude. She kept me safe. Ruth's lips quivered, but she forced herself to stand tall. You're safe now, child. That's what matters. Carter reached out a hand toward Ruth, his palm open. For the first time, there was no divide between them, just two people bound by the survival of one child. Ruth hesitated, then placed her weathered hand in his. Emma's arms circled them both. Don't fight, she whispered. Please, I don't want to lose anyone again. The words silenced them. Dr. Marin exhaled, almost reverent. This is the heart of trauma recovery. Connection. Emma has reclaimed her name, but she also holds on to Lily. That dual identity must be honored. She is both, not either or. Carter kissed the crown of his daughter's head. You can be both for as long as you want. You'll never have to choose unless you're ready. Emma nestled closer, her voice barely audible. Sing it. What? Carter asked. The lullaby. With me. He closed his eyes, steadying his breath. Then, in a broken baritone, he sang the melody he had written years ago. Emma joined with her small, wavering voice. The harmony was imperfect, untrained. But it was theirs. Ruth covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. The chapel walls absorbed their song, turning it into something larger, something that belonged not just to them, but to every scarred soul who had walked through those doors. When the last note faded, silence fell heavy and full. Dr. Marin closed her folder. That will be enough for today. Emma has crossed a threshold. Now we protect that progress. Carter held his daughter tightly, as though the world might try to reclaim her. For the first time in 2 years, the word hope felt solid, anchored by sound. As they left the chapel, the city buzzed outside with its endless traffic, indifferent to their miracle. But Carter knew the war wasn't over. Nolan Pierce would push harder than ever. Court battles loomed, yet inside him something unshakable had been restored. A daughter's voice, a father's song. And the promise that music could stitch together even the most broken of lives. The courthouse in downtown Seattle rose from 3rd Avenue in solemn gray stone, its columns worn by decades of reign and rulings. Inside, the atmosphere was part bureaucratic hum, part sacred ritual. On the docket that morning, in re-custody of minor Emma Hayes, age 7. The benches creaked under the weight of observers, attorneys, journalists sniffing for scandal, and a few curious onlookers. The case had leaked quickly. A billionaire financier, a child thought drowned, a grandmother from an encampment. It was the kind of story that blurred lines between family tragedy and public theater. Carter Hayes sat at the petitioner's table, suit crisp, but his hands trembling against the polished wood. Beside him sat Harper Sloan, his attorney, a sharp-featured woman known for her steady composure in family court. Across the aisle sat Ruth Parker, cane leaning against her chair, her back ramrod straight. Though not biologically related, she radiated the dignity of kinship. Between them, the guardian ad litem, appointed by the court, organized files in a manila folder. A middle-aged man with calm eyes, he had spent the past month visiting both Carter's Queen Anne mansion and Ruth's Capitol Hill apartment. His task, to determine the best interests of the child. The clerk announced, "All rise." Judge Marisol Ortega entered, her black robe flowing, her expression measured. She was known for her trauma-informed approach, often reminding the room that children were not assets to be divided, but lives to be protected. "You may be seated," she said. Her voice carried the weight of authority softened by empathy. The hearing began with evidence. Harper Sloan rose, clicking a remote to project DNA test results onto the courtroom monitor. "Your Honor, Exhibit A, a report from Northwest Forensics Laboratory. Probability of paternity is 99.998%. Mr. Hayes is biologically the father of the minor, formerly known as Lily Brooks, now identified as Emma Hayes." A hush rippled through the courtroom. Even Ruth closed her eyes, absorbing the truth she had both feared and expected. Harper continued, "We are not here to erase Ms. Parker's role. Without her, Emma would not have survived. But biology confirms that Mr. Hayes is her father, and law requires recognition of that fact." Ruth's attorney, a pro bono volunteer from Legal Aid, stood. "Your Honor, we do not dispute the DNA, but family is not only blood. For 2 years, Ms. Parker has been this child's only consistent caregiver. She provided shelter, food, stability when no one else did. Removing Emma from her care abruptly would constitute secondary trauma." Judge Ortega nodded, scribbling notes. "Understood. Guardian ad litem, your report?" The gal stood, voice steady. "Your Honor, I've interviewed the child extensively. She identifies herself interchangeably as Lily and Emma. She demonstrates strong attachment to both Mr. Hayes and Ms. Parker. My recommendation is joint legal custody with a transitional plan. This would allow Emma to retain continuity with Ms. Parker while gradually integrating into her father's home." The judge leaned forward. "And your rationale?" "Because the child's best interest is not severance but integration. She should not lose one family to gain another. She deserves both. Carter's throat tightened. He turned toward Ruth, meeting her eyes. For the first time, there was no hostility between them, only recognition. Harper spoke again. We propose joint legal custody, joint physical custody with alternating weeks, and designation of Ms. Parker as grandparent guardian of honor. We further request appointment of a trauma-informed family therapist to oversee the transition. The legal aid attorney nodded. We concur, provided the order ensures Emma's voice is central in every stage. The courtroom buzzed. It was an unusual arrangement. Rarely did family court weave such flexible, shared guardianship. But Judge Ortega's gaze was firm as she addressed the room. Custody disputes are too often treated as battles to be won. But this child's resilience is not a trophy. It is a testament to two people who refused to abandon her. I find that both Mr. Hayes and Ms. Parker are indispensable to her well-being. Therefore, the court approves a joint custody order with a shared parenting plan. A guardian ad litem shall remain assigned for 12 months. The transition will be gradual, with trauma-informed oversight. The gavel struck once, echoing like a bell through the chamber. Ruth's shoulders sagged with both relief and sorrow. Carter's eyes burned, but he bowed his head in gratitude. Emma sat quietly with a child advocate in the front row, unaware of the legal architecture being built around her. She simply clutched Captain Blue, humming faintly to herself, waiting for the adults to stop arguing about her life. When recess was called, Carter approached Ruth in the hallway. For a long moment they stood in silence among the marble columns and the shuffle of lawyers. "Thank you," Carter said softly, "for keeping her alive, for keeping her. Ruth's eyes shimmered. "Don't thank me. Just promise me you'll never let her become a headline or a pawn in your boardroom wars. She's a child, not a legacy." "I promise," Carter said, the words ringing with more truth than any corporate oath he had ever sworn. The courthouse doors opened, spilling them back into the drizzle of 3rd Avenue. Emma ran ahead, splashing through a shallow puddle. Both Carter and Ruth instinctively reached out to steady her, their hands brushing together. For the first time, they did not pull away. Rain fell in sheets over downtown Seattle, slicking the cobblestones of Pike Place Market until they glowed under neon signs. Vendors called half-heartedly over the storm, salmon for $10 a pound, tulips bundled in soggy paper, coffee steaming in styrofoam cups. But beneath the familiar bustle, something heavier rippled through the air. News had broken. Detective Avery Kim had spent weeks threading together the fragments. Burner phone logs, surveillance footage from a gas station on Aurora Avenue, bank transfers hidden in shell accounts. It ended with a fixer, an anonymous man in a mariner's cap arrested in a warehouse south of the market. Interrogation had been swift, and loyalty collapsed under the weight of federal charges. "He paid me," the man admitted. "Pierce. Said Hayes had to vanish before the signing. Said it was business." The confession, sworn and videotaped, landed on the desk of the U.S. Attorney. Within hours, a grand jury indictment was prepared. United States v. Nolan Pierce. Conspiracy. Attempted kidnapping. Fraud. Carter stood at the window of his office, looking down at the market where gulls wheeled in the storm. He should have felt vindication. Instead, he felt only exhaustion. Betrayal did not end with an indictment. It bled into every meeting, every silence, every friend who had looked the other way. Harper Sloan, his attorney, placed a folder on his desk. The buy-sell provision is ironclad. The dissolution clause triggers with any partner facing felony indictment. We can move to buy out Pierce's equity immediately. Fair market value is required, but with a fairness opinion secured, you'll control the end game. Carter nodded slowly. And the board? They'll fall in line. No one wants their names attached to Nolan now. Hours later, the boardroom that had once hummed with Nolan's charm was silent. Carter invoked the clause, laying out valuation reports, fairness opinions, escrow conditions. Nolan's chair sat empty, though his nameplate still glared like a ghost. The directors voted, almost unanimously. Pierce's stake would be purchased. Hayes Capital, reborn from Hayes and Pierce, would stand under one name. But Carter did not smile. Control had never felt so hollow. That night, in the atrium overlooking Pike Place, cameras flashed as reporters crowded beneath dripping umbrellas. Carter stood at a podium, flanked by Harper Sloan and Detective Kim. The indictment had already made headlines. Seattle financier charged in abduction plot. What came next would decide whether the story ended in scandal or in something else. He gripped the podium, the wood cool under his palms. His reflection glimmered faintly in the glass wall behind him, rain streaking like tears. "For years," he began, voice steady despite the storm in his chest, "I believed wealth could insulate me from the world's cruelties. I was wrong. Power without conscience builds nothing worth keeping." The reporters leaned in. Cameras clicked. "2 years ago, I lost my daughter in a storm. I thought the river swallowed her. I built walls of glass and steel around my grief. I let silence consume me, but I was given a second chance by a child who carried both my daughter's scar and her courage." His throat tightened, but he pressed on. "Today, Hayes Capital dissolves its partnership with Nolan Pierce. His equity will be purchased at fair market value. But more importantly, 20% of this firm's assets will seed a new endowment, the Lantern House Initiative." He gestured as a banner unfurled behind him, its letters bold against the rain. Housing, education, healing. This initiative will provide housing-first shelters, public school partnerships, and trauma-informed care for children without homes. Not as charity, as repair. Built by those who were once lost, for those still finding their way. Reporters shouted questions at once. "How much equity is 20%? Will Hayes Capital survive this divestment? Is this damage control?" Carter raised a hand, silencing the noise. His voice was lower now, but it carried through the atrium. "You cannot measure a child's life in EBITDA. You cannot reduce memory to a quarterly report. Return on investment is meaningless without return on kindness." The words cut through the storm like a flare. Even the skeptics stopped writing for a moment. Behind him, Ruth Parker and Emma watched from the side. Emma clutched Captain Blue, her green eyes wide as she listened. Ruth's weathered hand rested on her shoulder, steadying her. When the press conference ended, Carter stepped back, body trembling from the weight of it. Ruth approached, her cane tapping lightly against the floor. "You just promised the world something," she said, eyes sharp. "I promised her," Carter replied, glancing at Emma. Ruth studied him for a long moment, then gave the smallest of nods. Outside, Pike Place Market buzzed on, fishmongers tossing salmon through the air as if nothing had changed. But to Carter, everything had. Nolan Pierce would face trial, Hayes Capital would shrink but endure, and Lantern House, still only a banner in the rain, had been born. The reckoning wasn't triumph, it was recalibration. And as Carter stepped into the storm with his daughter's hand in his, he felt, for the first time in years, that legacy was no longer about towers of glass. It was about lanterns lit in the dark. The late summer sun slid slowly toward the horizon, gilding Puget Sound in molten orange. From the back garden of Carter Hayes's Queen Anne home, the skyline glittered across the bay, ferries cutting pale wakes through the water. Tourists gathered at Cary Park above, snapping photos of the Space Needle glowing against the dusk. But inside the house, It wasn't the view that mattered. It was the sound of clattering bowls and the smell of soup. Ruth Parker stirred at the stove, her patched apron tied tightly around her waist. She refused any housekeeper, insisting that kitchens were meant for family. On the counter, carrots and parsley from Pike Place lay in small piles, waiting to be chopped. Emma sat at the table, Captain Blue propped on the chair beside her, humming faintly as she stacked crackers into precarious towers. Scout, the retriever they had adopted a month ago, sprawled underfoot, tail thumping lazily. Carter moved awkwardly between them, more used to boardrooms than kitchens, but tonight determined to help. He carried bowls to the table, careful not to spill. "Not bad for a man who used to think microwaving was cooking," Ruth teased. He grinned faintly. "I'm learning from the best." They ate together as the sun dipped lower, the soup steaming between them. Ruth ladled seconds for Emma, who slurped happily, broth dribbling down her chin. Carter reached over with a napkin, laughing quietly. "Careful. That's a boardroom suit you're threatening," he joked. Emma wrinkled her nose. "You don't need boardroom suits anymore. You need soup suits." The table erupted in laughter. For the first time in years, Carter felt something whole. Not performance, not grief, just family. After dinner, they walked together down the slope into Georgetown, where an old warehouse had been remade into something new. Tonight was its first night open. Lantern House. The building buzzed with life. Volunteers carried bedding into dormitories. Teachers stacked donated books in classrooms painted with bright murals. A nurse checked supplies in a clinic stocked with donated equipment. In the courtyard, folding chairs had been set up for the ribbon cutting. The crowd was a mixture. Families who had once lived under bridges, city officials, social workers, neighbors curious about the transformation. No red carpet, no luxury branding, just a gathering of people waiting for doors to open. Emma clutched Carter's hand as they stepped through the crowd. Her green eyes widened at the murals, rainbows, fairies, lavender fields, children holding lanterns against a dark sky. "They drew our house," she whispered, pointing at a pink building painted into the corner of the mural. Carter bent down, throat tight. "Yes, they drew hope." When the time came, Ruth was handed the ribbon. She held the scissors awkwardly, then gestured for Emma to take them. Carter placed his hand over Emma's, steadying her grip. Together, child, grandmother, father, they cut the red ribbon. The crowd cheered, applause rolling like thunder. Emma beamed. Captain Blue clutched in her other arm. Inside, families began to explore. A reading nook lined with beanbags, dormitories with clean bunks, a cafeteria where volunteers ladled chili. For children used to cold concrete, it was nothing short of miraculous. As dusk deepened, volunteers passed out paper lanterns and matches. One by one, flames flickered alive, glowing softly in the courtyard. The children squealed as their lanterns lifted into the night air, drifting upward like orange stars. Emma tugged Carter's sleeve. "Daddy, can we send one too?" He knelt, helping her light the wick. The lantern swelled with heat, lifting gently from their hands. Together they watched it rise, joining dozens of others, painting the Seattle sky with light. Emma clapped her hands, her laughter echoing against the brick walls. "They look like stars on strings." Carter wrapped his arm around her shoulders, his voice breaking. "They're lights for those still finding their way." Near the entrance, a plaque gleamed under the lantern glow. Carter read it aloud, voice trembling. "Built by those who were once lost, for those still finding their way." Ruth leaned on her cane beside him, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "You did it," she whispered. "No," Carter said. "We did it." He looked at Emma. She did it. The three of them stood hand in hand, gazing at the lanterns climbing into the night. Around them, laughter and chatter swelled, a community knitting itself back together. Later, back at the Queen Anne house, the evening settled into quiet. Emma curled under a quilt on the couch, Scout's head heavy on her lap. Ruth dozed in an armchair, her cane resting nearby. Carter sat at the piano, fingers drifting across the keys. He played the lullaby softly, not for memory, not for revelation, just as background, a song to end a day. Emma stirred, smiling drowsily. "Keep playing," she murmured. And he did. The notes rose like lanterns into the night, fragile yet enduring. For the first time since the storm had stolen everything, Carter Hayes knew he was no longer alone. His legacy was not a firm or glass towers or market valuations. It was here, lavender in the garden, soup simmering on the stove, a grandmother's steady hand, and a child laughing in the glow of lanterns. The Puget Sound shimmered under moonlight, the lanterns still faintly visible as drifting stars. Carter closed his eyes, his daughter's hand in his, Ruth's presence anchoring him. They were a family, chosen not by fortune or blood alone, but by survival, by memory, by love. And in that moment, beneath the lights of Puget Sound, they were home. Thank you for staying with us until the very last chapter of Carter, Emma, and Ruth's journey. This story reminds us that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in love, healing, and the courage to start again. If this touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe, so you never miss the next story of hope, justice, and unexpected family.